The flour dust hung in the air like fine snow when Olivia Winters realized she had become completely invisible. And it was not the kind of magic that came from fairy tales, but the cruel sort that society imposed on women, whose bodies did not fit into the narrow confines of what men deemed desirable. Florence, Arizona Territory, in the spring of 1885 was a town built on copper mines and cattle ranches, where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and hope seemed as scarce as water in the summer months. Olivia had arrived 3 years earlier with nothing but a worn recipe book that had belonged to her grandmother, and enough determination to fill the Colorado River. She had opened her bakery on Main Street, a modest establishment with whitewashed walls and a hand-painted sign that read "Winters Bakery" in careful letters. The bread she baked was the finest anyone in Florence had ever tasted. Her cinnamon rolls were legendary among the miners who stopped by before dawn, and her pies had won her more praise than she could count. But praise for her pastries was all she ever received. At 24 years old, Olivia had long ago accepted that men looked through her rather than at her. Her body was round and soft, her waist thick, her arms full and strong from kneading dough every morning before sunrise. She had learned to move through the world as if she were a ghost, present but unacknowledged. Her worth measured only in the sweetness of her creations, rather than in her own right to be seen as a woman with desires and dreams beyond her oven. The morning started like any other, with Olivia rising before the sun had painted the eastern sky with its first brushstrokes of pink and gold. She lit the lamps in her bakery, stoked the fire in her large brick oven, and began the familiar ritual of measuring flour, sugar, salt, and yeast. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, and there was a meditation in the work that brought her peace even when loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. The dough beneath her palms was warm and pliant, responsive to her touch in a way that people never were. By the time the sun had fully risen, the bakery was filled with the intoxicating aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon. Olivia had just pulled a tray of rolls from the oven when the bell above her door chimed. She looked up to see Margaret Holbrook, the banker's wife, entering with her usual expression of vague superiority. "Good morning, Mrs. Holbrook," Olivia said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I get for you today?" "2 loaves of your wheat bread and a dozen of those rolls," Margaret said, her eyes scanning the display cases but never quite landing on Olivia herself. "My husband is having business associates for dinner, and I need something presentable." Olivia packaged the order carefully, wrapping each item in brown paper and tying the bundle with string. Margaret paid without meeting her eyes, took the package, and left without another word. It was the same transaction that played out dozens of times each day, a commercial exchange devoid of any real human connection. Olivia was a service, not a person, a convenience, not a woman worthy of consideration. The day continued in much the same manner. Miners came in groups of 3 and 4, their faces still dusty from the overnight shift, and they joked and laughed with each other while Olivia filled their orders. They spoke around her, about her baking, but never to her as though she were anything more than an extension of her shop. Young men courting their sweethearts bought her pastries to impress their ladies, never once considering that the woman who created such delicacies might herself wish to be courted. Even old Henry Patterson, the widower who ran the general store next door, treated her with a kind of benign indifference that hurt more than outright cruelty might have. By noon, Olivia had sold nearly everything she had baked that morning, which meant her afternoon would be spent preparing for the next day. She locked the front door, hung the closed sign in the window, and retreated to her kitchen to begin again. This was her life, an endless cycle of creation and solitude, of being needed for what she could provide but never wanted for who she was. She was rolling out dough for apple pies when she heard the sound of hooves and wagon wheels outside. The sound was not unusual in Florence, but something made her pause and wipe her hands on her apron before moving to the window. A stranger was dismounting from a dusty brown horse in front of her shop, a tall man in weathered clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He tied his horse to the post and stood for a moment looking up at her sign, then turned toward the door. Olivia realized with a start that she had locked it. She hurried to turn the key and pulled the door open just as the stranger was reaching for the handle. "I apologize," she said breathlessly. "I closed for the afternoon to do my baking, but I can still help you if you need something." The man looked up, and Olivia found herself meeting a pair of warm brown eyes that actually seemed to see her. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. There was a kindness in his face that made her heart skip in a way she had learned long ago not to trust. "I do not want to interrupt your work," he said, his voice low and pleasant with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south. "But I have been riding since dawn, and the smell coming from your bakery convinced my stomach that it was worth being persistent." Olivia stepped back to let him enter. "It is no trouble. What would you like?" He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that was slightly too long and curled at the ends. "What do you recommend?" The question surprised her. Most customers knew exactly what they wanted, having bought from her many times before. This man was clearly a stranger to Florence. "The cinnamon rolls are popular," she said, "and I have a few loaves of sourdough left from this morning. There is also apple pie, though it will not be ready until tomorrow." "I will take 2 of the cinnamon rolls and a loaf of that sourdough," he said, and then he did something that nearly made Olivia drop the bread she was reaching for. He smiled at her, not the perfunctory expression of a customer completing a transaction, but a genuine smile that reached his eyes and seemed to acknowledge her as a person standing before him. "Your smile is the sweetest thing here." Olivia froze, her hands still outstretched toward the bread. Heat flooded her cheeks, and for a moment she could not breathe. No man had ever said anything like that to her. No man had ever looked at her the way this stranger was looking at her now, as though she were something precious and worth noticing. She began, then had to clear her throat and start again. "Thank you. That is very kind." "I am only speaking the truth," he said simply. "I am Tucker Flynn, new ranch hand at the Double Bar Ranch just west of town. I arrived yesterday and was told that if I wanted decent food, I should come to Winters' Bakery." "Olivia Winters," she managed, finally finding her voice as she wrapped his purchases with trembling hands. "I own this place. Welcome to Florence." "Thank you, Miss Winters." He accepted the package and paid, his fingers briefly brushing hers as he handed over the coins. The touch sent an unfamiliar warmth through her arm. "I suspect I will be seeing you often. A man could get used to bread like this." After he left, Olivia stood in the empty bakery for a long time, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating far too fast. She told herself not to be foolish, that he was simply a polite man making idle conversation, that his compliment meant nothing more than ordinary courtesy. But no matter how firmly she lectured herself, she could not forget the way he had looked at her, as though she were visible, as though she mattered. Tucker Flynn returned the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. He came early, before the rush of miners and townspeople, and he always took his time selecting what he wanted. More importantly, he talked to Olivia. He asked her about her baking, about how she had learned her craft, about what had brought her to Florence. He told her about his own life, about growing up on a small ranch in southern Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 19, about drifting from place to place working cattle drives and ranch jobs until he had found himself in the Arizona Territory looking for something he could not quite name. "I think I was looking for a place that felt like home," he said one morning as he leaned against her counter eating a cinnamon roll that was still warm from the oven. "Somewhere I could put down roots instead of always moving on. Have you found it?" Olivia asked, surprised by her own boldness in asking such a personal question. Tucker looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "I think I might be starting too." The weeks passed, and a routine developed between them. Tucker came to the bakery every morning before work, and sometimes he stopped by in the evening after his shift at the ranch was done. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the mundane. He made her laugh with stories about troublesome cattle and the other ranch hands, and she found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about her childhood in Missouri, about the grandmother who had taught her to bake, about the loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. "Why did you come to Florence?" Tucker asked one evening as they sat on the bench outside her bakery watching the sun set over the desert in streaks of orange and purple. "I needed to start over," Olivia said quietly. "After my grandmother died, there was nothing left for me in Missouri. My parents had passed years before, and I had no siblings. I sold everything and came west because I thought perhaps in a new place I could build a life for myself." "Have you?" His voice was gentle. "I have built a business," she said carefully, "but a business is not the same as a life, is it?" Tucker was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his fingers strong as they intertwined with hers. "No," he said, "it is not the same at all." Olivia looked down at their joined hands, afraid to breathe, afraid that any movement might break the spell and cause him to remember that she was not the kind of woman men wanted to touch. But he did not let go. Instead, he squeezed her fingers gently and continued to sit beside her as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared overhead. That night, Olivia lay awake in her small room above the bakery, unable to stop thinking about the warmth of Tucker's hand in hers. She wanted to let herself hope, to believe that his attention was genuine and not some elaborate joke or misunderstanding. But hope was dangerous for women like her, women who had been taught again and again that their bodies made them unworthy of romantic love. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. Olivia arrived at her bakery before dawn as usual, only to find that someone had thrown a rock through her front window during the night. Glass littered the floor, and the morning cold rushed in through the broken pane. Her first thought was for her oven and her supplies, but everything else seemed untouched. It was just the window, just one act of senseless vandalism that nonetheless made her feel violated and unsafe. She was sweeping up the glass when Tucker arrived. He took one look at the broken window and his expression darkened. "Who did this?" "I have no idea," Olivia said, fighting back tears of frustration. "It happened sometime during the night. I heard nothing." Tucker set down the parcel he was carrying and immediately began helping her clean up the glass. "You have something to cover this until we can get it replaced." "There is canvas in the back room," she said gratefully. Together they worked to board up the window temporarily, and Tucker insisted on walking to the general store to order a new pane of glass. While he was gone, Olivia tried to compose herself and begin her morning baking, but her hands were shaking, and she kept glancing at the broken window with a sick feeling in her stomach. When Tucker returned, he brought not only the promise of a new window but also Sheriff Tom Bradford. The sheriff was a grizzled man in his 50s who had seen too much of the worst in people to be easily shocked. "Miss Winters," he said, tipping his hat to her, "Tucker here tells me you had some trouble last night." Olivia explained what she had found that morning, and the sheriff examined the scene with a practiced eye. "Probably just some drunk cowboy causing mischief," he concluded. "But I will ask around, see if anyone saw anything. You let me know if anything else happens, you hear?" After the sheriff left, Tucker stayed to help Olivia with her baking. She protested that he would be late for work, but he waved off her concerns. "The ranch can spare me for a morning," he said firmly. "Besides, I want to make sure you are all right." His presence was both comforting and unsettling. Olivia was not accustomed to having anyone in her kitchen, and Tucker seemed to take up so much space with his height and broad shoulders. But he followed her instructions without complaint, his large hands surprisingly deft as he helped her knead dough and shape loaves. They worked in companionable silence, and Olivia found herself intensely aware of him, of the way his shirt stretched across his back when he reached for something, of the low rumble of his voice when he asked her a question, of the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. Tucker paused in his work and turned to face her fully. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Olivia said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks but forcing herself to continue, "you must have noticed that I am not the sort of woman men usually pay attention to. I am not foolish enough to pretend otherwise. So I find myself wondering what you want from me, or if this is some sort of game I do not understand." The expression that crossed Tucker's face was one of such genuine hurt that Olivia immediately regretted her words. He set down the dough he was working with and wiped his hands on a towel before approaching her. "May I be honest with you?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. "When I first rode into Florence, I was tired and hungry and wondering if I had made a mistake coming here," Tucker said quietly. "Then I smelled your baking and I followed that smell to your shop, and when you opened the door, I saw the most beautiful woman I had ever laid eyes on." Olivia shook her head, tears pricking at her eyes. "You do not need to lie to me. I am not lying." Tucker reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "Olivia, I do not know who taught you to think so little of yourself, but they were wrong. You are beautiful. Your eyes light up when you talk about something you love. Your hands create magic with flour and sugar. Your smile could chase away the darkest night. And yes, you have curves and softness, and I happen to think that makes you even more lovely, not less." "Tucker," she whispered, unable to say anything more as tears spilled down her cheeks. He wiped them away with his thumbs, his touch infinitely gentle. "I have been trying to court you properly," he said. "Coming here every day, talking with you, getting to know you. But if I have been too subtle, let me be clear. I would very much like permission to call on you as a suitor, if you would be willing to consider me." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Because in all my wandering, I never expected to find someone who made me want to stay in one place," Tucker said. "Because you are kind and talented and you make me laugh. Because I think about you every moment I am not with you. Because I am falling in love with you, and I think I have been since the first moment I walked through your door." Olivia could not speak. Her throat was too tight with emotion, her mind unable to process what she was hearing. Tucker Flynn, this handsome, kind, wonderful man, was standing in her kitchen telling her he was falling in love with her. It seemed impossible, like something from one of the romantic novels she sometimes read late at night when the loneliness became too much. "You do not have to answer right now," Tucker said when the silence stretched on. "I know this is sudden, and I do not want to pressure you." but I wanted you to know how I feel, and I wanted you to understand that my intentions are honorable." "Yes," Olivia managed finally. "Yes, you may court me. I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Tucker's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He took both of her hands in his and raised them to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You have made me very happy," he said softly. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of work and stolen glances, and Olivia felt as though she were floating somewhere above her own body. When Tucker finally had to leave for the ranch, he promised to return that evening, and Olivia spent the remainder of the day in a daze, burning one batch of rolls because she was too distracted to pay attention to the time. News traveled fast in a small town like Florence, and it was not long before people began to notice that Tucker Flynn was spending an unusual amount of time at Winters' bakery. At first, the gossip was relatively benign, speculation about whether the new ranch hand had developed a particular fondness for cinnamon rolls. But as days turned into weeks and it became clear that Tucker was courting Olivia in earnest, the tone of the gossip changed. Margaret Holbrook came into the bakery one morning with a pinched expression that Olivia had learned to recognize as the woman working up to saying something unpleasant. "Miss Winters," she said, as Olivia packaged her usual order, "I feel it is my Christian duty to warn you that people are talking." "Are they?" Olivia kept her voice level, though her stomach clenched. "That cowboy who has been hanging around here," Margaret continued, lowering her voice as though sharing a confidence. "You need to be careful. Men like that, well, they do not have honorable intentions toward women of your, shall we say, circumstances." It took all of Olivia's self-control not to throw the bread at the woman's head. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Holbrook," she said coldly. "But I assure you, Mr. Flynn is a perfect gentleman." "I am only trying to help," Margaret said with false sweetness. "I would hate to see you get hurt when he moves on to someone more suitable." After Margaret left, Olivia found herself shaking with a combination of anger and fear. The words had found their mark because they echoed her own deepest insecurities. What if Tucker did eventually realize he could do better? What if this was all some temporary fascination that would fade once the novelty wore off? She was still upset when Tucker arrived that evening. He took one look at her face and immediately asked what was wrong. Olivia tried to brush it off, but he was persistent, and finally she told him about Margaret's visit and the warning she had delivered. Tucker's jaw tightened as he listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something about my past." Olivia's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The revelation that would explain everything, that would prove Margaret right. "When I was younger," Tucker began, "I was engaged to be married. Her name was Sarah, and she was the daughter of the ranch owner I was working for in Texas. She was beautiful and charming, and I thought I loved her. But after we got engaged, I started to see a different side of her. She was cruel to the Mexican workers on the ranch, looked down on anyone she considered beneath her station. She wanted to marry me because she thought I was handsome, and because it thrilled her to go against her father's wishes, but she did not actually care about me as a person." He paused, and Olivia waited, not sure where this story was going. "I called off the engagement 3 months before the wedding," Tucker continued. "It caused a huge scandal and I lost my job and had to leave town. But I realized something important. I realized that beauty without kindness is hollow, that attraction without respect is meaningless. I spent the next several years drifting because I was looking for something real, for a woman who had substance and character, not just a pretty face." He reached out and took Olivia's hand. "When I met you, I found everything I had been looking for. You are genuine and hardworking and talented. You treat everyone who comes into your shop with courtesy, regardless of who they are. You have created something from nothing through your own determination and skill. And yes, I find you beautiful, but that is only a small part of why I am falling more in love with you every day. Olivia felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were not tears of hurt or fear. I am terrified, she admitted. I am terrified that I am going to wake up and discover this has all been a dream, or that you are going to realize you have made a mistake. I understand that fear, Tucker said gently. But I am not going anywhere, Olivia. I am not that kind of man. When I commit to something, I see it through. And I am committed to proving to you that you are worthy of love, every single day for the rest of my life if that is what it takes. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in her life, Olivia felt truly safe. She rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, and she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. The summer heat descended on Florence with a vengeance, turning the desert into an oven and making Olivia's work even more challenging. She had to start her baking even earlier in the morning to avoid the worst of the heat. And by noon each day, the bakery felt like she was standing inside one of her own ovens. But Tucker continued to come by every day, bringing her cool water from the well and helping her carry supplies in from the storage room. Their courtship progressed slowly and sweetly. Tucker took her on walks in the evening when the temperature had dropped to something bearable, and they explored the desert surrounding Florence, discovering hidden canyons and ancient rock formations. He taught her about tracking and reading the signs of wildlife, and she shared her knowledge of the desert plants, pointing out which ones were edible and which ones would make good remedies for common ailments. On Sundays, when the bakery was closed, they would pack a lunch and ride out to the Gila River, where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water burbled over smooth stones. Tucker was teaching Olivia to ride, patient and encouraging as she learned to control his gentle mare. She was terrified at first, convinced that she was too heavy and would hurt the horse, but Tucker assured her that the mare was strong and that she was doing beautifully. "You are a natural," he said one Sunday afternoon as she successfully guided the horse through a series of turns. "Another few weeks and you will be racing me." Olivia laughed, breathless and exhilarated from the ride. "I do not think I will ever be that confident, but I am enjoying this more than I expected." They dismounted near a particularly shady spot by the river and spread out a blanket to eat the lunch Olivia had prepared. As they sat together, sharing bread and cheese and discussing their plans for the week ahead, Olivia felt a sense of contentment she had never experienced before. This was what she had been missing, she realized. Not just romance or companionship, but genuine partnership, the feeling of being with someone who saw her as an equal and valued her thoughts and opinions. "What are you thinking about?" Tucker asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I was thinking that I am happy," Olivia said simply. "Truly happy, perhaps for the first time in my adult life." Tucker reached over and laced his fingers through hers. "Good," he said. "That is all I want, for you to be happy." "What about you?" she asked. "Are you happy?" "More than I can say," he replied. "I found what I was looking for, Olivia. I found home." As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and a break from the oppressive heat, Tucker asked Olivia if she would accompany him to the annual harvest dance that Florence held every October. It was the social event of the season, and Olivia had never attended before, too aware of the whispers and pitying looks that would follow her if she showed up alone. "I do not have anything appropriate to wear," she said, which was true but also an excuse born of nervousness. "Then we will get you something," Tucker said firmly. "There is a seamstress in town, is there not? Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Chen was a Chinese woman who had come to Florence with her husband to work in the mines, but after he was killed in a cave-in, she had supported herself by taking in sewing and mending. She was an excellent seamstress, and Olivia had used her services before to repair her work dresses. "I suppose I could ask her to make something," Olivia said hesitantly. Tucker smiled. "Then it is settled. We are going to that dance, and I am going to spend the entire evening showing everyone in Florence how lucky I am." Mrs. Chen was delighted to take on the commission, and she worked with Olivia to design a dress that would be both flattering and comfortable. They chose a deep blue fabric that brought out the color of Olivia's eyes, with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that moved beautifully when she walked. Mrs. Chen added delicate embroidery at the neckline and cuffs, tiny flowers and vines that showcased her considerable skill. When Olivia tried on the finished dress 2 weeks later, she barely recognized herself in Mrs. Chen's mirror. The dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her curves in a way that made her feel feminine and attractive rather than self-conscious. Mrs. Chen had also helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual simple bun, with curls framing her face and a blue ribbon woven through. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Chen said with satisfaction. "That cowboy of yours will not be able to take his eyes off you." The night of the dance, Tucker arrived at Olivia's door dressed in his finest clothes, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a shine. When she opened the door and he saw her in her new dress, his expression made every moment of anxiety worthwhile. "Olivia," he breathed, "you are absolutely stunning." She blushed and ducked her head, still not entirely comfortable with compliments, but Tucker gently tilted her chin up. "I mean it," he said. "You take my breath away." The dance was being held in the largest barn at the Double Bar Ranch, which had been cleaned out and decorated with lanterns and autumn flowers. A small group of musicians was set up at one end, and tables laden with food lined the walls. It seemed like everyone in Florence and the surrounding area had turned out for the event. When Olivia and Tucker entered, there was a noticeable lull in the conversation as people turned to look. Olivia felt her courage wavering, but Tucker squeezed her hand reassuringly and led her confidently into the barn. He introduced her to his fellow ranch hands and their wives or sweethearts, and to Olivia's surprise, everyone was friendly and welcoming. Several of the women complimented her dress, and one of the ranch hands told Tucker he was a lucky man. When the music started, Tucker led Olivia onto the dance floor. She had not danced in years and was worried she would be clumsy, but Tucker was a good lead, guiding her through the steps with patience and skill. As they moved together to the music, Olivia gradually relaxed and began to enjoy herself. She caught sight of Margaret Holbrook watching them with a sour expression, but for once she did not care what the woman thought. She was here with Tucker, and he was looking at her like she was the only woman in the room. They danced several dances, and then Tucker led her outside for some fresh air. The night was cool and clear, the stars bright overhead. They walked a little way from the barn to where they could hear the music but also have some privacy. "Are you having a good time?" Tucker asked. "I am having a wonderful time," Olivia said honestly. "Thank you for convincing me to come." "Thank you for being brave enough to come with me," Tucker replied. "I know it was not easy for you." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Tucker took a deep breath. "Olivia, there is something I want to ask you." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" Tucker took both of her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "We have been courting for nearly 6 months now, and every day I become more certain that you are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I know it might seem fast to some people, but when you have spent as many years as I have searching for the right person, you know when you have found her." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Olivia gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "Olivia Winters," Tucker said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Olivia could not speak. Tears were streaming down her face, and her throat was too tight with emotion to form words. She nodded frantically, and Tucker laughed, a sound of pure joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I need to hear you say it," he said gently. "Yes," she managed, her voice breaking. "Yes, Tucker, I will marry you. I love you so much." "I love you too," he said, and then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was Olivia's first kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed a kiss could be. Tucker's lips were warm and soft against hers, and the kiss was tender and sweet, full of promise and love. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he whispered. They returned to the dance to share their news, and the announcement was met with cheers and congratulations from Tucker's friends. Even some of the townspeople who had been less than kind to Olivia in the past offered their best wishes, caught up in the romance of the moment. They danced the rest of the night away, and Olivia felt as though she were floating on air. The wedding was planned for early December, which gave them just over 2 months to prepare. Tucker wanted to marry sooner, but Olivia needed time to arrange for someone to run the bakery while they took a brief honeymoon. They decided to travel to Tucson for a few days, which would be Olivia's first trip away from Florence since she had arrived 3 years earlier. Mrs. Chen enthusiastically agreed to make Olivia's wedding dress, and this time they chose a cream-colored fabric with delicate lace details. Tucker arranged for the ceremony to be held in the small church in Florence, and the reception would be at the bakery itself, which seemed fitting. Olivia would provide the cake and pastries, of course, and several of the ranch wives offered to help with the other food. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Olivia found herself the subject of much more attention than she was comfortable with. Women who had barely spoken to her before suddenly wanted to discuss wedding plans and offer advice. Some of it came from a genuine place of happiness for her, but Olivia suspected that much of it was simply curiosity about the unusual match between the beautiful cowboy and the fat baker. She tried not to let it bother her, but there were moments when the old insecurities crept back in. Late one night, about 2 weeks before the wedding, she was lying awake in bed when she heard a knock at her door. She threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, worried that something was wrong. When she opened the door, she found Tucker standing there, looking distressed. "I am sorry to come so late," he said. "I know it is not proper, but I needed to see you." "What is wrong?" Olivia asked, ushering him inside. Tucker ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned meant he was agitated about something. "I was in town earlier, and I overheard some men talking in the saloon. They were making bets about how long our marriage would last, saying that I would get tired of you once the novelty wore off, or that you would not be able to satisfy me as a wife." He looked at her with anguish in his eyes. "I wanted to fight all of them, but I knew that would just make things worse. But Olivia, I need you to know that what they were saying is vile nonsense. You are everything I want and need, and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you and to anyone else who doubts us." Olivia felt a surge of love for this man who was so angry on her behalf. She took his face in her hands and made him look at her. "Tucker, I know there will always be people who do not understand why you chose me. I have made my peace with that. What matters is that we understand, that we know what we have together is real and true. Let them say what they want. We know the truth." Tucker pulled her close, holding her tightly. "How did you get so wise?" "Years of practice at ignoring cruel people," she said with a wry smile. They talked for another hour, and by the time Tucker left, both of them felt better. Olivia went back to bed with a renewed sense of confidence. She and Tucker belonged together, and no amount of gossip or speculation could change that. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. Olivia woke before dawn, as was her habit, but instead of starting her baking, she took the time to bathe and prepare herself. Mrs. Chen arrived early to help her dress and arrange her hair, chattering excitedly about how beautiful everything was going to be. When Olivia finally looked at herself in the mirror, fully dressed in her wedding gown with her hair elaborately styled and a simple veil secured with pins, she felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. She looked like a bride, like a woman on the happiest day of her life, and the joy on her face was undeniable. "Perfect," Mrs. Chen declared. "Now you must not cry and ruin all my work on your face." The church was packed when Olivia arrived. It seemed like half the town had turned out, some out of genuine affection for her or Tucker, others simply for the spectacle. Olivia did not care. She only had eyes for Tucker, who was waiting at the altar looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. When their eyes met, he smiled that warm, genuine smile that had first captured her heart, and Olivia knew that everything was going to be all right. She walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, but she held her head high. She had made her own way in the world, and she was choosing Tucker of her own free will, with no one to speak for her but herself. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Tucker kissed her, Olivia felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The reception at the bakery was a joyous affair. Olivia had outdone herself with the cake, a 3-layer masterpiece decorated with delicate sugar flowers. There was music and dancing, and even some of the townspeople who had been skeptical about the match seemed to be caught up in the celebration. Margaret Holbrook attended, though she spent most of the time with a pinched expression that suggested she was not entirely pleased by how well everything was going. As the sun began to set, and the party showed no signs of slowing down, Tucker pulled Olivia aside. "Ready to escape?" He whispered in her ear. She nodded, suddenly nervous about what came next. They said their goodbyes and slipped away to the small house that Tucker had been renting, where they would spend their wedding night before leaving for Tucson in the morning. The house was modest but comfortable, and Tucker had clearly made an effort to make it welcoming. There were flowers on the table and fresh linens on the bed, and a fire had been laid in the fireplace, even though the night was not particularly cold. "Are you nervous?" Tucker asked gently as he closed the door behind them. "A little," Olivia admitted. He took her hands in his. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. We have the rest of our lives together. There is no rush." But Olivia shook her head. "I want this, Tucker. I want to be your wife in every way. I am just a little overwhelmed by how much my life has changed." Tucker smiled and kissed her softly. "Then let me show you how much I love you." He was patient and tender, taking his time to help her relax and to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Olivia had been worried about this part of marriage, worried that Tucker would be disappointed by her inexperience or by her body. But he made her feel beautiful and desired in a way she had never imagined possible. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness and completion that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the warm darkness, and Tucker traced lazy patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "I love you, Mrs. Flynn," he murmured. "I love you too," Olivia whispered back, and she realized with wonder that she had never meant anything more in her entire life. The trip to Tucson was wonderful. They traveled by stagecoach, and though the journey was long and uncomfortable at times, Olivia did not mind. She was with Tucker, and that made everything an adventure. Tucson was larger and more cosmopolitan than Florence, with actual hotels and restaurants and shops that carried goods from as far away as San Francisco and even Europe. Tucker had reserved a room at one of the nicer hotels, and they spent their days exploring the city and their nights wrapped in each other's arms. Olivia discovered that she enjoyed the physical aspect of marriage far more than she had ever expected, and Tucker seemed to delight in finding new ways to pleasure her. They were like children let loose in a candy shop, eager to explore and experiment and learn each other's bodies and desires. On their last day in Tucson, Tucker took Olivia to a photographer's studio. "I want a portrait of us," he said. "Something we can hang in our home and show our children someday." The idea of children made Olivia's breath catch. They had not discussed it in detail yet, but she knew Tucker wanted a family, and the thought of carrying his child filled her with a joy she had not expected. The photographer posed them carefully, Tucker standing behind Olivia with his hands on her shoulders and both of them looking directly at the camera. When they received the finished photograph several weeks later, Olivia was struck by how happy they looked, how right they looked together. Returning to Florence was not as difficult as Olivia had feared. The town had adjusted to the idea of their marriage during their absence, and while there were still some who whispered and speculated, most people had moved on to other gossip. Olivia reopened the bakery, and Tucker went back to his work at the ranch, and they settled into married life with an ease that surprised both of them. Tucker moved his few possessions into the rooms above the bakery, and they made the space truly theirs, arranging furniture and adding little touches that reflected both of their personalities. Tucker built her a bookshelf for the novels she loved to read, and Olivia sewed curtains for the windows and made their bed a cozy nest with quilts and pillows. The rhythm of their days was comfortable and satisfying. Olivia still rose before dawn to begin her baking, but now Tucker rose with her, helping her carry supplies and stoke the fire before he left for the ranch. He returned every evening in time for dinner, which they usually shared in the small kitchen above the bakery, talking about their days and making plans for the future. As winter gave way to spring, Olivia began to suspect that she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses were late, and she was feeling unusually tired and occasionally nauseous in the mornings. She waited until she was certain before telling Tucker, afraid to get his hopes up only to be disappointed. Finally, in early March, she asked him to sit down at their kitchen table because she had something important to tell him. Tucker looked worried, and Olivia realized she should have thought about how to present this information better. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is wonderful," she said quickly. "Tucker, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed his face was one of pure, unadulterated joy. He let out a whoop of happiness and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Assuming I survive being spun around like a top," Olivia said breathlessly, and Tucker immediately set her down, looking contrite. "I am sorry, I was not thinking. Are you feeling all right? Should you be resting?" "Do you need anything?" Olivia laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But yes, you are going to have to be a little more careful with me for the next several months." Tucker placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. "Our child is in there," he said softly, "part of you and part of me. Are you happy?" Olivia asked, though she could clearly see that he was. Happy does not even begin to cover it, Tucker said. You have given me everything I ever wanted, Olivia. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I did not know it was possible to be this content. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Olivia found the Arizona summer heat even more oppressive while carrying the extra weight of the baby. Tucker was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying that she was working too hard or not eating enough. Olivia bore his fussing with good humor, understanding that it came from a place of love and concern. As her belly grew, she found that her regular customers were genuinely excited about the baby. Women who had children of their own offered advice and shared stories, and even some of the rough miners would ask how she was feeling and tell her to take care of herself. It was strange but wonderful to feel so included in the community, to be seen not just as the baker but as a person with a life and a family of her own. Dr. Williams, the town's physician, examined Olivia regularly and pronounced both her and the baby healthy. "You are strong," he told her. "You will do just fine. I expect you to deliver sometime in early October." Tucker began preparing for the baby's arrival with the same thoroughness he brought to everything else. He built a beautiful wooden cradle, sanding it until it was perfectly smooth and carving delicate designs into the headboard. Olivia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. Mrs. Chen helped her make a christening gown of white linen with delicate embroidery, insisting it was her gift to the baby. In late September, Olivia began to feel the first twinges of labor. Tucker wanted to immediately fetch the doctor, but Olivia, who had been talking to the other women in town, knew it was still early. She continued working through the mild contractions, timing them as Dr. Williams had instructed. By evening, the contractions were stronger and closer together, and Tucker finally convinced her to let him bring the doctor and Mrs. Chen, who had offered to assist with the delivery. Dr. Williams examined her and said it would still be several hours, and he settled in to wait. Tucker refused to leave Olivia's side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth as the contractions grew more intense. The labor was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the early morning hours. There were moments when Olivia was certain she could not endure another contraction, but Tucker was there, encouraging her, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. Finally, just as the sun was rising, she felt an overwhelming urge to push, and Dr. Williams told her it was time. With Tucker supporting her and Mrs. Chen offering encouragement, Olivia pushed with all her strength. The pain was incredible, but so was the sense of purpose, and when she finally heard the first thin wail of her baby, every moment of suffering seemed worth it. "It is a boy, doctor," Williams announced, placing the squalling infant on Olivia's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Olivia looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Tucker was crying unashamedly, his tears falling on both Olivia and the baby as he kissed them both. "He is perfect," Tucker whispered. "You are amazing. You did so well." They named him Thomas William Flynn after both of his grandfathers who had passed before he was born. Thomas was a calm baby, easy to soothe and quick to smile, and both Olivia and Tucker were completely besotted with him. Tucker proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Olivia for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle they had created. The bakery became even more popular after Thomas was born, with customers stopping by not just for bread, but to see the baby. Olivia found that she had to carefully balance her time between her work and caring for Thomas, but Tucker helped whenever he could, and Mrs. Chen offered to watch the baby sometimes when Olivia needed to focus on a particularly complicated order. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, he proved to have his father's easygoing nature and his mother's creativity. He loved to be in the bakery kitchen, helping Olivia by playing with scraps of dough while she worked. Tucker taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, setting him on the gentlest horse at the ranch and leading him around the corral. When Thomas was 2 years old, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more nausea and fatigue, but Olivia pushed through, determined to keep the bakery running and to care for Thomas. Tucker worried constantly, but Olivia assured him that she was fine, that this was just how some pregnancies went. Their daughter was born in April of 1889, a tiny, red-faced infant who came into the world screaming her displeasure at leaving the warm comfort of her mother's womb. They named her Rose Margaret Flynn, and she proved to be the opposite of her easygoing brother in every way. Rose was fussy and demanding, but she was also fiercely affectionate, and when she smiled, it was like the sun coming out. With 2 young children and the bakery to run, life became more chaotic than ever. There were moments when Olivia felt overwhelmed, when the demands of motherhood and business seemed too much to balance. But Tucker was always there, a steady presence and a willing partner in all things. He had been promoted to ranch foreman by this time, which meant better pay and more regular hours, and he used his increased income to hire a young woman named Sarah Potter to help Olivia in the bakery several days a week. Sarah was 18 years old and eager to learn, and she turned out to have a real talent for baking. With her help, Olivia was able to spend more time with her children while still maintaining the business she had worked so hard to build. The arrangement worked well for everyone, and Sarah proved to be not just an employee but a friend, often staying for dinner and helping to entertain the children. The years passed in a blur of flower-dusted mornings and laughter-filled evenings, of children's birthday parties and quiet nights by the fire with Tucker. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and asked endless questions about everything. Rose was wild and fearless, climbing trees and catching lizards and giving her parents constant heart attacks with her adventures. In 1892, when Thomas was 7 and Rose was 3, Olivia found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was unexpected, as she and Tucker had thought their family was complete, but the surprise quickly turned to joy. Their third child, a son they named Henry Robert Flynn, was born in December, a Christmas baby who arrived during a rare Arizona snowstorm. Henry was a happy medium between his siblings, neither as quiet as Thomas nor as wild as Rose. He was a cheerful child who loved everyone and everything, and he brought a new energy to the family. With 3 children, the rooms above the bakery were feeling cramped, and Tucker began talking about building a proper house, somewhere with a yard for the children to play and enough room for everyone to spread out. By 1894, they had saved enough money to buy a plot of land on the edge of Florence and to begin construction on a house. Tucker did much of the work himself, with help from his friends at the ranch, and the house slowly took shape. It was a simple but sturdy structure with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. When it was finished, the whole family stood together looking at it, and Olivia felt a sense of accomplishment and pride that rivaled what she had felt when she first opened her bakery. They moved in on a warm spring day in 1895, and Olivia felt as though she had finally achieved everything she had ever dreamed of. She had a home, a thriving business, a husband who loved her, and 3 beautiful children. The girl who had once been invisible, who had believed she was unworthy of love, had built a life that was full and rich and meaningful. The bakery continued to be successful, and Sarah eventually bought it from Olivia in 1898, when Olivia decided she wanted to focus more of her energy on her family and her home. Sarah had learned well and continued the traditions that Olivia had established, maintaining the bakery's reputation for quality and excellence. Olivia still helped out occasionally, especially during busy seasons, but for the most part, she was content to let the business be in someone else's capable hands. Tucker had become one of the most respected men in Florence, known for his integrity and his skill with horses and cattle. The Double Bar Ranch thrived under his management, and the owner had even offered to make him a partner in the operation. Tucker had accepted, which meant their financial future was secure, and they could afford small luxuries that would have been unthinkable in their early years together. But despite their material success, the greatest joy in their lives remained each other and their children. Thomas grew into a young man who wanted to be a teacher, heading off to normal school in Temp when he was 18. Rose, true to her adventurous nature, shocked everyone by announcing that she wanted to be a veterinarian, and she apprenticed herself to the local animal doctor with the same determination her mother had once shown in building her bakery. Henry, still the peacemaker and the heart of the family, talked about becoming a minister, drawn to the idea of helping people find hope and meaning in their lives. In 1905, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Tucker and Olivia sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were grown, or nearly so, their lives had been blessed with prosperity and love, and they had weathered every challenge that came their way by facing it together. "You remember the day I first walked into your bakery?" Tucker asked, taking Olivia's hand in his. "How could I forget?" Olivia said with a smile, "You were dusty and hungry, and you told me my smile was the sweetest thing there." "I meant every word," Tucker said, "and I would say it again today. You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I fall in love with you more deeply every single day." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly content. "I never thought I could have this," she said softly. "A real family, a loving husband, a life that feels full and complete. There were so many years when I thought I was invisible, when I believed that no one would ever see me as anything more than the fat baker who made good bread." "Then those people were fools," Tucker said firmly. "You were never invisible, Olivia. You were just waiting for someone who had eyes to see your worth." "I am glad it was you," she whispered. "So am I," he replied, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, and Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Florence alone and afraid, convinced that she would spend her life in solitude. But she had been wrong. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who saw past her size to the woman she was inside. Together, they had built a life that was richer and more satisfying than anything she could have imagined. In the years that followed, Olivia and Tucker became grandparents multiple times over. Thomas married a fellow teacher and gave them 3 grandchildren. Rose, against all odds and social conventions, did become a veterinarian, one of the first female vets in the Arizona Territory, and she married a rancher who admired her strength and independence. They had 2 children. Henry became a minister as he had planned, and he married a gentle, kind woman who worked alongside him in his ministry. They had 4 children, and their home was always filled with love and laughter. Olivia lived to see all of her grandchildren grow to adulthood, and she never tired of telling them the story of how she and their grandfather had met. She wanted them to understand that love could come in unexpected forms, that worth was not measured by appearance, and that the greatest adventures often began with someone being brave enough to truly see another person. Tucker remained devoted to Olivia until the end of his days. They grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their faces gaining lines that mapped out a life well lived. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1955, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And Tucker still looked at Olivia with the same warmth and adoration that he had shown on the day he first walked into her bakery. When Tucker passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87, Olivia was devastated. She had known that their time together could not last forever, but the loss was still overwhelming. For weeks, she could barely function, moving through the motions of life but feeling as though half of her soul had been torn away. But gradually, with the support of her family and the memories of all the years of love and happiness she and Tucker had shared, Olivia found her way back to joy. She understood that Tucker would not want her to spend her remaining time in grief, that he would want her to continue living fully and finding happiness in the world around her. So she did. Olivia lived for 5 more years after Tucker's death, years she spent surrounded by the family they had created together. She told stories about Tucker to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive in the hearts of his descendants. She continued to bake occasionally, teaching her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the recipes that had been passed down through generations. When Olivia passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 91, her family mourned but also celebrated a life that had been full and meaningful. At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Her children spoke about her strength and resilience. Her grandchildren talked about her kindness and wisdom. And old-timers from Florence remembered the young woman who had arrived in town with nothing but determination and a talent for baking, and who had built a legacy that would endure for generations. Thomas, now an elderly man himself, stood to give the final eulogy. He talked about how his mother had taught him that true worth came from character and integrity, not from appearance or social status. He spoke of how she and his father had shown him what real love looked like, love that was patient and kind, love that endured through hardship and celebrated in triumph, love that saw past the surface to the person beneath. "My mother once told me that she spent years feeling invisible," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she was wrong. She was never invisible. She was a light in this world, and that light continues to shine through all of us who loved her and through the values she instilled in us. She and my father built something rare and precious, a love that transformed both of their lives and created a family that will carry their legacy forward long after we are all gone." Olivia was buried next to Tucker in the Florence cemetery, under the wide Arizona sky they had both loved. Her headstone reads simply, "Olivia Winters Flynn, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, but to those who had known her, she was so much more. She was proof that love could find anyone, that worth was inherent and not determined by others, and that a single moment of connection, a cowboy saying, 'Your smile is the sweetest thing here,' could change the entire trajectory of a life." The bakery that Olivia had founded continued to operate in Florence for many more years, passed down through several more owners, but always maintaining the standards of quality and care that she had established. And in that bakery, hanging on the wall behind the counter, was a faded photograph of a young couple on their wedding day, she in a beautiful cream-colored dress and he in his finest clothes, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of such joy and love that everyone who saw it could not help but smile. That photograph was a reminder to all who entered that love came in many forms, that beauty was in the eye of the beholder, and that the sweetest things in life were often found in the most unexpected places. Olivia and Tucker's story became part of Florence's history, a tale told to new generations as an example of what was possible when two people truly saw each other and chose to build a life together based on respect, admiration, and genuine affection. Their descendants continue to thrive in Arizona and beyond, carrying with them the values that Olivia and Tucker had instilled. They were people who looked beyond the surface, who valued character over appearance, who understood that every person had worth regardless of how society might judge them. And whenever they gathered for family reunions or holidays, someone would inevitably raise a glass and offer a toast to Olivia and Tucker, the baker and the cowboy whose love story had become legend. In the end, Olivia Winters Flynn had lived a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. She had been loved deeply and had loved in return. She had built a business, raised a family, and created a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. And it had all started on a spring day in 1885, when a dusty cowboy walked into her bakery and did something revolutionary. He saw her, truly saw her, and recognized that her smile was indeed the sweetest thing in Florence, Arizona territory.